Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of ClyphX Pro Q&A with Stray. I'm shooting this episode live today because I need some practice for an upcoming event, which I'll give you more details on in the coming weeks. But for now, let's give this live thing a try and just jump right in. The question for today comes from the forum, from forum member Modern Science, and the question is it possible to set Eclipse launch quantization and follow action? Unfortunately, that's not possible. The part of live that scripts like ClyphX Pro communicate with doesn't allow for that. But it doesn't mean that we can't do things along those lines. Now, this question also goes on to talk about other topics, which we'll look at in the latter part of this video. But for now, let's focus on this launch quantization part. All right, so I'm going to switch over to live and drag in a clip. All right, so you can see this clip's launch quantization is set to global. And that means it's going to be, its launch quantization will be determined by the global quantization value. So let's change that to 2 bars. And now you'll see that when I launch this clip, it's going to be quantized to 2 bars. So the flashing there indicates that it's waiting to play. All right, so it's waiting to play for the quantization interval to expire. Okay, now we can also launch this clip via ClyphX Pro. Let's use an X clip for an example. And when you use an X clip to launch another clip, you want to set the global quantization, the launch quantization of that X clip to none. Otherwise, you're going to get double quantization. So we're going to use this action to play 1, which means play the first clip on the second track, and you'll see that we get the 2-bar quantization still. Okay, but we can also override the launch quantization of the clip by using the action named play Q, which allows you to specify the quantization to use, which will be none in this case. And now you can see I can launch that clip with no quantization. Okay. All right. So that answers the first part of the question. We can't set launch quantization, right? The launch quantization is still set to global here, but we can override it. Okay, which can be useful in many cases. All right, so that's one part of the question. Now, the question goes on to talk about something else that's pretty common, and that is when you take a clip like this, the 16-bar clip in this case, and you duplicate it and move the start marker of each duplicate forward so that each has a different start position, and that way you can kind of slice or chop the clip up. And to show you what that looks like, first of all, I'm going to set the launch quantization to 132, which is typically, you want something like that when you're slicing or chopping. And then I'll duplicate this clip and move the start marker forward 1 bar. Duplicate it again and move the start marker again forward 1 bar. And again, and move the start marker forward 1 bar. Okay, and now I could chop it up. Yes, I can. Okay, so that works. All right, and there's actually an action in ClyphX Pro to make that easier, and I'll show you that here. I'm going to apply this to the selected track and the selected clip on that track. The action's name is chop, and you could specify how many parts you want to chop in. So I'm going to say 16 because it's a 16-bar clip. Select the clip, trigger the action, and now we have 16 clips here, and you can see if we go through here, the start markers are moved just like we did manually before, and we could slice it up. Okay, so that works. The downside of that, though, is you need, for every clip you want to do this with, you need a bunch of clips. So if I had a bunch of 16-bar clips that I wanted to control in this way, I'd have to have 16 clips for each one of them, which is somewhat inefficient. So there's other ways of doing it in ClyphX Pro. Let's take a look at that. The first one is called Q, which basically allows you to trigger a clip from a virtual cue point, all right, that you specify. So I'm going to change this here to Q, 0, all right, and the number that you specify after Q is the absolute beat position, all right. So in this case, we're launching it from the very first beat, all right. The next one, we'll launch it from 4 beats in, which is the beginning of the second bar, and then we'll just keep increasing by 4. All right, and now one other thing on this is that if your clips, like this clip, for example, if that clip is on a relatively slow hard drive, you'll typically want to turn on the RAM switch. Otherwise, you might get hard disk overloads. So turn that on, and now you can see we can chop it up in a similar way. Okay, and to show you the flexibility of this, I can bring in another clip, this one here, and set its quantization to 30 seconds and turn the RAM switch on, and now I could chop it up. Okay, and of course, you don't need to use X clips for this. You could use X controls so you can do the chopping directly from a MIDI controller. All right, so this is another way of doing it that's pretty handy. All right, there's one other way I want to show you. Actually, let me just reset the start markers on these guys. All right, I should mention one of the reasons you might not want to use this one is because, again, you typically need to turn on the RAM switch, and you need to use quantization. All right, this clip Q action will not work if quantization is set to none. All right, so that's a couple downsides to that. I mean, if you're trying to do fast triggering, this is not going to be a good approach for that. There's one other way of doing it that's relatively new, and that is to send the clip to simpler. Okay, so I can select a clip here. Let me stop this and send it to simpler. So that'll create a new track with a simpler on it. Now, right now, it's not really set up for chopping. I'll be playing it chromatically, which is not what I want. So to be able to slice it up, I have to switch to slice mode. Then we'll do slice by beat, and then change the division to 1 bar. And now I can chop it up. Okay, so of course we don't want to have to, go in here and manually change these settings with our mouse. So we should use a longer action list that could set those settings up for us. All right, and when I use longer action lists, typically I'm going to do that in a macro. All right, so let's switch to Notepad and look at the macro that I got set up for this. All right, so it triggers the action to simp, all right, and then it waits for 500 milliseconds. And the reason for that is because creating the track and the simpler device takes a little bit of time. So let's wait 500 milliseconds, and then we'll set the play mode of simpler to slice, and then we'll set its slice mode to beat. And then we will use this mult action, which does different things depending on which slice mode is active. In this case, beat is active, so mult will apply to the divisions, and we want to set that to 1 bar. Okay, so now if we go back here into live and try that macro, here's what we get. Whoop. Okay, let me delete this and give that a go. Okay, so now it does the same thing we saw before, but now it sets up the settings for us. Okay, now one thing that might be kind of a problem here is that this is going to create a new track for every clip. So if I was to select this clip now and do slice, it's going to create a new track. All right, now in a production scenario, hey, you might want that, but in a live scenario, you might not want that, all right, because you're going to end up with a bunch of extra tracks in your set that you don't need. So maybe you just want to have one, let's call it a sample deck that, that's the only track that kind of is used this way. So how can we accomplish that? Well, let's go back to Notepad, and I have a different macro set up here, this guy here, slice B, and it's the same as this guy up here, the slice macro that we saw before, but with just 2 additional actions. The first one is sample deck delete. All right, and that means what this is going to do is look for any track named sample deck in the set and delete it. And then after we've sent our clip to simpler and the track is created, we're going to name our track sample deck. Okay, so what this allows for is that there's only ever going to be one track named sample deck in our set. All right, so let's look at how that works now. Coming back here, this is called slice B. Oh, sorry, let me switch it to live too so you can see what's going on. Okay, and then slice B. Okay, so now select verse 1, slice it, get set to sample deck. Okay, again, this is verse 1. If I go to verse 2, slice B, and again, only one sample deck. All right, so in other words, only one track is ever being created. All right, so I hope that gives you some ideas on what you can do. Let me switch back so you can see me. So yeah, I hope that kind of gave you some actions on what you can do in terms of slicing or chopping, however you want to refer to it in live with ClyphX Pro. And I hope that I wasn't too wordy in this live kind of podcast type deal here. And we will hopefully be doing more of these in the future. So until then, keep the questions coming, and I'll see you in the next episode.